Clear the aisles. The projectionist has smicha. Hi, I'm Avraham Kivlevitz. I'm here with Yitzchak Kolakowski. It's been a while, Yitzchak. We've had sort of a month off since our last foray into darshaning about old movies and vintage TV. And I know part of that month was Chol Hamoed, where I know you had time off from your other job, and you were able to sort of, I guess, feed your old movie buff bone in some way, right?
Oh, we had quite a fun time. We visited an actual active movie studio not too far, maybe about an hour from where we live, on the Hudson River in upstate New York. And this was a fellow who we meet at all these conventions. The one who runs the studio, and I don't know if I want to mention his name or not because I don't know if a bunch of people are going to be knocking on his door for a Chol Hamoed trip next time. But he had mentioned he comes to Monster Bash. He comes to a lot of other. There's another convention this weekend, actually in your neck of the woods in New Jersey in Parsippany, so not too far from you, where a lot of the actors and actresses are coming out to sign autographs and so forth. And the Chiller Theater, and we might go down there Sunday. We're debating whether or not we're going to visit there, but this fellow comes to Chiller Theater. He comes to there's a museum in Connecticut called Witch's Dungeon, and he hangs out there a lot.
So I take it this fellow has a connection and definitely to old horror films. That's one of his.
Yeah. So he took us on. He mentioned last Monster Bash that we could anybody wants to come visit, they could come, and that was in October. And I said to him at that time in October, I said, my kids will. I don't think he's Jewish, but I said, my wife and kids and we all have off from work and school during Passover. One of the days of Passover, we'll come and visit. He said that's wonderful. He was very excited that we could come visit, and my wife wasn't feeling so well, but my mother wanted to come, and she was there with us at Monster Bash, and all but one of the kids came, and he takes us in. It's very unassuming. You would have no idea that this was a film studio. You come in there, it looks like an old warehouse or something. First thing, he has an active set that he's filming a movie of some kind of zombie movie with police officers, and he's in the process of filming. And he showed us how everything is marked out to be a police station and how the props are glued down for continuity. Explained all that, and then actually on my YouTube channel, it was after that point that he said, you guys can take pictures, videos, whatever you want, and it's all on my YouTube channel. He showed us. He does a lot of puppet shows.
And these films that he's making stream on places like YouTube or other streaming platforms.
Yeah, actually, yeah, he has. I don't know exactly the zombie movie he was making. I don't know how that's going to be released, if that's for Sci-Fi Channel or something else. He works with Broadway. He works with ESPN. He works for very big productions and things. And he works.
And I understand from the pictures I saw that he's quite a collector of arcane and I guess very novel objects from.
So that's the fascinating thing. There were three things in particular. Even though he had a lot of props, he had the original ET, which he brings to Monster Bash. Where I said, "Oh, I just saw that 2 months ago by Cortland Hull who's his friend at the Witch's Dungeon." He's like, "Yeah, this is the same one. It makes the rounds, and it's actually that ET, the original, is also going to be at the Chiller Theater this weekend. They announced that on Twitter that original.
I think I have to reveal to our listeners that you hate ET, but right? But
yeah, I'm not a fan, but
I like. Again, we are going to, look, we definitely ET is coming up because we're coming up on 40 years of ET, and I think I definitely want to recommend it, and maybe I can convince you otherwise. So I think really the point of this story is that he inspired you really to sort of go back a little bit and to taste some classic horror films. And
I took a picture sitting in the chair that was from Grandpa Munster's laboratory. It was an electric chair. That was that, and then he showed us the dentist chair that was used in the 1960 Little Shop of Horrors that Jack
Nicholson sat in, and
yeah, and he showed us also some chairs that were from 1925 from the Phantom of the Opera. So he had some amazing stuff there in this huge studio, all kinds of, and his own puppets, and he does a puppet show with monster themes. I think it's called Monster TV, and part of that is on YouTube. And he has, a set where you see a castle, and he showed us really how he does all the work. And that as you're
and I guess unlike other Chalamoyed excursions where you're just surrounded by a mass of black and white and hopefully trying to find a place to eat your matzah and cream cheese, over here you sort of got the royal treatment, because I assume it was not, I'm sure it wasn't with so many other people, so you were able to get.
No one else there. There was no one else there. He was just showing us around himself.
Well, that's always great when you get like a private screening. I'm trying to get you to get to the movie already, so let's
So talking of, to segue into that, the set shows.
Thank you. Finally, yes.
I did finally. There's a movie I've been wanting to watch for many, many years, and I just never found the time to sit down and watch. And to be honest, I was kind of distracted and didn't watch that carefully, even though I could tell it was a very good movie. 1932, The Old Dark House, a Universal picture. And it has a great cast. Boris Karloff, Charles Lawton's one of Charles Lawton's first movies, actually. Raymond Massey, who we've spoken about before. Gloria Stewart. So it's Ernest Thesiger, who also famous for another, and it's directed by James Whale, famous for another James Whale movie with Karloff.
We talked about James Whale when we talked about Bride of Frankenstein.
Bride of Frankenstein. So it has a lot. It has those two from Bride of Frankenstein, Karloff and Thesiger, Melvin Douglas. Just a fantastic ensemble cast. It's interesting because it's, as far as I know, it's one of the few Universal movies other than the silent movies like the Phantom of the Opera that we talk a lot about copyrights. It seems that this movie fell into the public domain. It's free on Tubi and on a few other streaming. I think it's on YouTube, and but I also I found a better copy, I believe, on Criterion. I think that's where we watched it, and it was really quite an interesting movie. The thing that it's one of these kind of typical the people they're driving and there's a horrible storm and they get stuck in this house, that the only thing they can find where to go, and they wind up finding this old dark house filled with very eccentric characters. There's one woman who's very religiously preoccupied. Boris Karloff is the butler who's mute. So again, he's almost reprising the role. I think he does a better job in this than he did in Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein, I think, is the superior film of all of these, but it really is a powerful, interesting movie.
It's really, but it's been known when you told me you saw it and how much you enjoyed it. I note that it's been designated sort of a horror comedy, sort of similar to Bride of Frankenstein in a way.
It's not it's not a science fiction or supernatural horror like Bride of Frankenstein or Dracula or anything like that, but it's more of a, but these eccentric characters all put together give it kind of a comedic atmosphere like Bride of Frankenstein. It's very, or also The Invisible Man, which is also James Whale, another one of my favorites, also has a lot of comedic tones in it. So it's not a comedy in the sense of later Abbott and Costello, that type of thing. It's very much a James Whale film. That's really what it comes down to, the very eccentric, flamboyant.
Without putting any spoilers, and I think one of the things that it also really deals with mental illness, right? It deals with
that's it really. And again, I also don't want to spoil the movie, but on the other hand, there's one character at the end who's kind of hidden throughout the whole movie, and when he is presented, me being a person who works with the mentally ill in my ministry, both at Rockland Psychiatric Center and at Waymart, as we discussed in our other podcast, being a chaplain in a prison and in a mental hospital, and the prison being a mental health program focused prison, I experience what it's like to interact with people who are mentally ill, to minister to them, the very high level of intelligence that most of them possess, especially their religious fixations. Most, you'll find, maybe not most, but you'll find a lot of mentally ill people who will know scripture by heart and be able to quote scripture and correct you if you're using a different translation or something, because they're so well versed in scripture, and a little bit of that is present there, but also this, just the way that again, this character at the end who was, there are several mentally ill people in this
Right. Obviously, I mean, the whole night, I think, if you take a look at the trailer that you can find on, it's readily available. You can see the images really are very stark and indicate an aggression, rashness, anxiety, and yeah, it definitely. I again, I don't know much about the film. I definitely want to see it. I know that it's only 72 minutes long.
Right.
and it seems like it runs. It seems like it's really full of a lot of what eventually became a lot of the classic tropes of the dark and stormy night.
Right.
Being stuck in an old house. But this seems to be one of the first talkies to actually do it. And it is pre-code, so there's a little bit of I guess there's a risque element in it as well, right?
Somewhat, nothing extremely graphic. I mean, some of the other movies from that time were a lot more than that, or also more violent and so forth. Especially some of Karloff, some of the movies Karloff did for Universal at that time were quite a lot more violent than this one. But it's there's some very tender moments. But the level of acting and the level of precision that Whale really always had in all of his films, but like this film really, it has all of the aspects that a James Whale film has to see, these the level of acting, the
right.
quality.
And again, it really J.B. Priestley, who was a quite a famous novelist, did the screenplay, and
Well, it was based
along with a Jewish guy, Ben Levy. So
so it's Ben Levy and R.C. Sheriff who did the screenplay,
mm-hmm.
and Priestley wrote the novel that it's based on. But Sheriff, who's uncredited, did the screenplay for The Invisible Man, and I think that's really where the humor comes in. With and also it's just fascinating that it's, even though it's an American movie, most of the cast are British.
Well, you got Melvin Douglas and Raymond Massey. Raymond Massey was Canadian, by the way.
Right.
And Melvin Douglas was quite an American, and I think he was, in a way, the prototypical dashing look for the 1930s.
Yeah, you have Karloff, you have Charles Lawton, you have Thesiger, you have Remember Wills, you have quite a few British actors in this movie.
Yeah. There's again a little point that always struck me, and it's really one of the reasons I think why Capra really hated Arsenic and Old Lace, was because he could not get Karloff to do it. Although Karloff, the original Frank Kesterling play, Karloff actually played himself, or played the character supposed to look like him, the one that was on Broadway. It ran for, I guess, 300 and something, showings. But when Capra wanted to make the movie, Karloff refused. So they had to get Raymond Massey, who's in this film, to play the person who supposedly looks like Boris Karloff, which, it's so disconcerting. Arsenic and Old Lace is something, of course, a staple really of American television as well. It's something, I guess, that fell in the public domain, but something that so I guess it's
the movie didn't fall into the public domain. No.
Well, it's
But
shown. It's
yeah,
one of the films that it's shown continuously on on television.
yeah, I learned something interesting that in
But I'm
on
saying, but
the
the point is here we actually
yeah,
have Massey and Karloff together. So that's
right,
something.
right. I learned something interesting about this that Bela Lugosi actually played that role on stage for a few years as well. The Karloff the Karloff character
Uh,
was played on stage by Bela Lugosi. I didn't know that. I just learned that recently on there's a YouTube channel, Dark Corners, and they do a lot of movie reviews and they do some documentary. They
all
had
right,
a
listen,
documentary.
Yitzhak, do not praise the competition.
Yeah,
There's other. Come to us. We'll tell you about that. We'll sell you the other stuff.
yeah.
Well, you know what? You definitely gave me a desire to see this film, and as another type of film that we talked about, Hollywood, and we've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. The interconnection between the U.S. and Britain. Um, I
You know,
actually,
this film has because, like I said, with the British cast,
right,
it
and
wasn't
in a
David
way,
Whale
in a way,
himself
it's sort of.
doing
I understand it's sort of a send up of British Moors, and I think all these characters, the Lawton character, and perhaps the others, are supposedly typical British fops or people that perhaps are going to learn a lesson, and in a way, it sort of punctures, I guess, some of the respectability of what was considered the British gentry and et cetera. So I think that it probably James Whale, it was I don't think anything he made was just arbitrary. I think he was a person who was like an auteur of the greatest in the greatest way, trying to paint the perfect picture. And I think just for the images, it's probably worth it. I know that it was when they restored the film, they actually submitted it in the 2017 a number of international festivals. So people should get to see this film again, to see the way it was originally done. And I think it was very much a lost masterpiece. Um, I want to talk about a film that is also very much a send up of British life and British attitudes. And it's a film that was based on, and the screenplay was actually written by the author of the original stage play, Noel Coward. And the film I'm talking about is Blithe Spirit, which is a film that was released in 1945, but the stage play on which it was based on, and Coward made some alterations, and we've talked about the problems of filming a play, but the play was actually developed over a couple of weeks, and it ran as a great hit in Britain in the midst of World War II, as when people were still mourning their dead during the Blitz. It became a tremendously popular film. It sort of reminds me again of our period, although the COVID is not as extreme as what was going on during World War II, but it was sort of a coping mechanism for the people of Britain. You had a film that really dealt in a very lighthearted fashion with death, dealing with it's about a sort of a ghost, a spirit that comes back to a husband who has already remarried. And it isn't just like Topper or Beetlejuice or something like that. It really, in a way, opens up the superficiality of the main character.
It's funny you mentioned Beetlejuice. That was the other movie we watched over Cholamayit.
Well, I don't know if that's 40 years yet, but it's definitely a tour de force by Michael Keaton. Might be Michael Keaton's best film. I don't know, including I know he's won an Oscar, I think, for a couple of things, but or at least Birdman or and of course the film he made about the Washington Post. But here you're not just talking about some sort of dead people that nobody else can see that are haunting. There really is, in a way, when the man's second wife comes back, when Charles Condamine, second wife, is is frustrated by the fact that the first wife has come back, and clearly this man, played by Rex Harrison in the film, um, who had been somewhat of a I don't know if he was ever a matinee idol, but by this time in 1945, he was already someone, he was already approaching middle age, very much a middle age, but a serious actor, obviously someone very much in command of diction, as we all know, was playing Henry Higgins later. And he um, is the husband who somehow has to cope with the fact that now his dead wife has come back and she seems to be stuck in the house with him. And his second wife is extremely frustrated. Of course, there's a lot of hijinks in the beginning where he's talking to the dead wife and she thinks that he is talking to her. And the actors really pull it off well. We've seen this type of trope consistently, like where the character is invisible and no one can hear them, and who are you talking to? This is a very obvious little shtick of screwball comedies. It's probably been done a number of times, but this film does it really lusciously and beautifully. The film was directed by David Lean. Now, Rex Harrison said, I think in his autobiography, that that unfortunately this was a film that was supposed to be a comedy and was given over to one of the great British directors who really did not have a flair for comedy at all. David Lean, of course, is the director of Lawrence of Arabia, of Dr. Zhivago, and in the 40s, he made some incredible classics, including the very anti-Semitic Oliver Twist, where you have one of the worst examples of an anti-Semitic character, Alec Guinness playing Fagin as a pedophile and as a murderer, and which Dickens probably meant, but this was not Ron Moody playing him in the musical in 1968. So David Lean, and of course David Lean made Great Expectations in the 40s as well. David Lean was a very gifted director, one of really the great British directors. But this film, it doesn't have the lightest touch, but it is really it's filmed in tremendous Technicolor. I talked about the film you recommended, the Old House. It's the restoration, the black and white imagery is stark and beautiful. I would say that I've rarely seen such beautiful Technicolor as you can see in this film, Blithe Spirit. But I think although the film really deals with what does it mean that we have relationships and how do we move on from relationships and what is it that connects us to the people that we're married to and what is it really about and how we reflect about it. It's also, as I said, a send-up of that type of upper crust British attitude, and it also deals with the attitude that many of these aristocratic people have to spiritualism, because the character that is able to bring the dead woman back is Madame Arcati, who has been a mystic and has somehow been a medium ever since she's 4 years old. And this, I think, is probably Noel Coward's most inspired comedic creation. And it's played here by Margaret Rutherford. If you take if you Google Blithe Spirit and all the different versions of it, including some of the ones that were made recently, you'll see that this character is always played by an actress who's really looking for. It's almost like the Lady Macbeth of drawing room comedies. It's really an incredible drawn character, and I think it's in a way a very full representation of what does it mean to be an eccentric mystic. It isn't just an off-the-wall person like you might find Martin Short playing in certain comedies. I'm thinking about Father of the Bride or something like that, with just someone with a funny accent who's just bumping into walls, or even Peter Sellers' roles as Clouseau. This is really an eccentric, but with a sense of dignity as well about what she believes in. And although there are inconsistencies in her approach that make it funny, she really is committed totally. So you really have some great performances in here. The women are famous British actresses. I think Kay Hammond Constance Cummings, I think, are the women who play the first and second wives, first and second wives respectively. And some of them were reprising their stage roles. But Margaret Rutherford, as the medium, she makes sense. And in other words, when you see her and when you hear her talk about the events and how she's trying to make sense of them, you almost can believe that she actually is able to connect to people in the other world. And I think this really brings up the bigger issue, which is in the middle of war, and even when the film came out after so many had died, to be presented with a I don't know if the word is immature or a very mild and almost teetering on the ridiculous sense of what does it mean to die and to come back. When you had people that were being murdered and slaughtered, and yet we don't want to think about that, but we don't necessarily want to put death completely under wraps. We want to talk about death, but we want to speak about death in this fairy tale, fantastic way, where when you die, you're in some sort of office and you can write papers and you can somehow come back. And when you come back, you sort of look almost the way you did before, except you've got some sort of greenish hue about you. I think this is to me, it's fascinating how that this play and film, and it's all the remakes and redons, has had an incredible life. Unlike the film that you said, which is sort of this, we have to rediscover a masterpiece. Blithe Spirit is always being done. If you Google it, you'll see that it's a play that is always being produced in one fashion or another. And I think it really speaks to the fact that we can't really, we want to get a grip on what mortality means. What does it mean when we lose someone? But we actually want it in a way that it's just, some sort of, off the cuff sort of, oh yeah, you die, and then she was in some other place, and now she comes back, and right, without really facing up to the horror of losing somebody. And again, we don't always want to be in a down state, but I think it's really the opposite. People want an idea of death, like a Flintstone vitamin. They want an idea of death that they can somehow talk about and think about and say, yeah, that person's really, they look exactly almost like they did right before they died, and in some way, they're somehow still haunting and still possibly able to connect to us. There is no necessarily Gan Eden. There's no necessarily a place where they're going and changing and transforming. They're pretty much the same thing. Like death is really just some place that you like you're under the covers somewhere. And I think that's part of the unfortunately, the sort of like what we need to suck our thumbs on. Otherwise, the idea of things is really too great to comprehend and to really absorb. I think one of the things that I think is interesting about the film as well, and this, I've mentioned many times when we talked about Wise Blood and other films and books, the differences between the film and the book or the play. In the original play, the main character, the Charles Condamine character, actually just leaves both of his, because it turns out, spoiler alert, that the second wife ends up dying as well, because the ghosts, although they can't be seen, have a power, unless it's by the person who they're coming for. The ghosts can move things around. So the first wife wanted to kill off Condamine, Rex Harrison, in order that he should join her in this Olam HaEmes state, or the Olam HaSheker state, as it would be. And it turns out that she gets into the car instead of him. So it turns out the second wife dies as well, and then they're both there, haunting him. So in the original play that Noel Coward wrote, he ends up basically leaving them, and they're stuck in the house because this is where they came back to, and he runs away from them, and now he's got a life of his own. So once again, it shows you that his relationship was with each of them. One of them was just a lusty, sensual one that had no intellectuality, and the other one was sort of just a very stuffy one that was really lacking in real love, and real, physical love, and in that way. And he basically is now moving on beyond both of them. In the film, however, he sort of gets his comeuppance by because I guess they're able to, to alter the brakes again in the car, and it turns out they're all three stuck together for eternity somewhere. So it's really, very much a trifle, but it's something which I think surprisingly stays with you because of the beauty of the what David Lean is able to do. I think the sharpness of the dialogue, Margaret Rutherford's performance, and the cinematography, and the incredible use of colors. The film, I think, has been noted, even though it was made in 1945. It has very sophisticated sense of special effects and how they're able to make you actually believe that although the characters are standing next to each other, that one is actually in a different plane of existence than the other. So I think it's perhaps a trifle that might be worthwhile to sort of, if you are somewhat depressed and you're thinking about death and other things like that. I think it's a film that you can enjoy, and I think it stays with you in some ways. I know that when I told you, Yitzchak, that I was going to talk about Blithe Spirit, we mentioned that Rex Harrison, who was the star of this film, eventually, of course, comes to Hollywood. And he comes to Preston Sturges, puts him in Unfaithful Yours, which is also a great film. Anything Preston Sturges does is great. But he sort of has sort of like a career, in the 50s and 60s, where he's getting old in Hollywood, and he's playing. He has a lot of important roles. I mentioned Higgins before, and I think you told me that he was notoriously difficult to deal with, a very difficult actor that gave a lot of American actors a lot of trouble. I think you mentioned to me, right?
Well, my wife toured with Julie Andrews, and Julie Andrews was on Broadway with Rex Harrison and My Fair Lady, and that was one thing Julie Andrews, I believe, mentioned often about how she would compare difficult people to Rex Harrison, about how difficult he was to work with. Although I still find him to be a very charming and interesting actor. One movie that I really enjoyed him in was the Agony and the Ecstasy, where he plays the Pope who was warring with the Michelangelo, who's played by quite well actually by Charlton Heston. Very interesting movie. Really way too long. It could have been a much shorter movie, but I made it through it. And one thing I appreciate was that he played that Pope, recognizing that by that time in history, the Pope was more of a political figure than a religious figure.
Well, look,
and
Rex, I think you can put words into many actors, but Rex Harrison, you really believe that he conveys the intelligence of the words that he's saying.
Yeah, and that's what you in that movie. That's what I saw, and obviously,
and obviously as Higgins in My Fair Lady, where he is someone who is obsessed with language and words. I think it was almost a role he was meant to play. Although, as you're right, Julie Andrews did play opposite him in My Fair Lady. I do want to mention that
only on stage, not obviously not in the movie. Yeah.
Of course, it was Audrey Hepburn, and with someone else dubbing her voice. I think that just to mention, we started today with your family, little piece of your family's Chalamoid excursion. So I'll just end a little bit of a Rex Harrison note. That although I knew about My Fair Lady when I was growing up, my mother had bought me. She bought for herself the Broadway cast recording album, and of course Rex Harrison was not on that album for some reason. They had I guess another singer who could actually do more than talk sing. Rex Harrison didn't really have much of a voice. But I was familiar with Rex Harrison from a film that I was dying to see when I was growing up as a little boy, because I had read all the books, and that was, of course, Dr. Dolittle, the Dr. Dolittle series, which I had read all the Hugh Lofting novels or stories of Dr. Dolittle. Those were actually books from the 1920s, and I just ate them up when I was a kid. And then I saw that when I was about 7 years old, that these were the books that I had been reading for years, that they were making a movie out of it, and I couldn't wait. And the movie did come out in 1967, but in Memphis, Tennessee, the theater that was meant to show this film, the Crosstown Theater, which was a theater I could walk to from my house, was playing Gone with the Wind for, believe Guzma, it was 96 weeks, I believe, because as you know, nothing stirs people in the South than a film about the Civil War and about how great the South was and how the South has suffered. So I was waiting and waiting for Dr. Dolittle to come out so I could see it. And but for some reason, Gone with the Wind was still held over. So despite the fact that the film was being shown throughout the United States, well, I could only see it in my town. And the only place it was ever going to show was at this theater. Eventually, sometime, I guess in late 1968, when the film was already over a year and a half old, I finally got to see the film. And the film, Yitzchak, you talk about length of films. Once again, this was a long one. This film was the running time was 152 minutes. So you take a real trifle children's story and you really blow it into it's sort of this enormous, unfortunately, very boring and not convincing version of a classic. And I was so disappointed by Rex Harrison's portrayal, because to me, the idea of a person like Dr. Dolittle, who to me was the epitome of intelligence and being able to solve issues and exploring the world and exploring the world of animals that he was able to speak to. I was so disappointed by how unlovable and unlikable, Rex Harrison was as this character. He seemed, although they had all the animals around him, like he was like, what the heck am I doing in this flop? Right, I can't stand it. It was, to me, it left such a bad taste in my mouth, because here was again the cheshek to finally see on screen what I had read about and imagined about, and waiting to see that, and then really being so duly disappointed. There are some, again, so Dr. I don't know if that's Rex Harrison's, because he was in a number of flops. I think he was also in Cleopatra as well, which is also considered one of the great flops of the year. But I think it, in a way, as much as you would say Rex Harrison had to suffer as the character of Charles Condamine in Blithe Spirit, I guess that would have been perhaps, it's probably better to hang out with your two ex-wives than to have to be known for eternity as, as Dr. Dolittle in a film that really, I can't see anybody sitting through it anymore. That's probably a worse a worse hell that you could think of, is being stuck in a bad adaptation of a children's film, and you are almost the opposite of someone of whimsy. So that's just a little bit of Rex Harrison stuff, and as we say. So that's about it, my friends, today. Watch your step on the way out. We'll catch you. Be well.